Thank you, Tom, in advance for giving me some of your time to answer more mental health questions. I'd like to be a little bit more targeted during this interview, in part because I have a different role than I did in the past, where I was a mental health associate or worker, which is kind of like an orderly. It used to be, but with a few more technical functions. But now I'm a mental health screener, so that puts me in the very interesting position where I'm able to interview people who are who are in crisis, and I have to determine through conversations between myself and other mental health screeners and the psychiatrists whether or not this person is, let's say, legitimately suicidal, dangerous to themselves or others or property. And that can take the form of people's behavior being so disorganized or perhaps bizarre that we as these agents in society elect to segregate them for a period of time so that they can, see if we can give them a stable environment and then, as it is now, medicate them. So that's where I'm at. My question first is whether or not some consciousnesses are here part-time. Because if you interact with people who say have schizophrenia or other psychotic disorders, it appears that they're doing so little here, but in terms of decision making or interaction. And I'm not talking about just people who suffer from catatonia, but there are numerous negative symptoms associated with schizophrenia, like avolition, alogia. They'll have just very few words they'll use when they communicate, and they will have long periods of time of thoughtlessness, of literally not having content in their mind, and just staring off into space. And in situations like that, it makes me wonder, what is the consciousness doing? Is it busy doing something else, or is it just really less active? Can you comment on that?
Well, sure. I can comment on almost everything, Matthew.
Great.
My first question would be, how do you know that there's nothing in their mind? Just because they're not interacting with you, staring off into space, and maybe don't reply when you talk to them, doesn't mean that there's nothing in their mind. They may
That's
be...
from their own, this is from me looking at forums of people who have schizophrenia, who will actually state that they really do have long periods of time of just, sitting and staring. And I've even asked them, hey, what have you been thinking about? And they'll just say with a little grin afterwards, nothing.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I can see that as well. All right, so the first question is, are there some people come here like part-time, and when they get these diseases, are they just checked out and they're not really here anymore? I'd say that that's probably no, that they're not here for part-time, that what they have is a problem that is a rule set problem. It's a problem that's physiology. There's parts of their avatar that just don't function well. And the reason for that is that, the way things happen, the way something new comes into this reality is that there's a random draw from probability distribution of the possibilities. So that means you have to look at all the possibilities. And some of those possibilities are, 1 in a million. Some are 1 in 1,000. Some are 1 in 10 million. But eventually they all get picked. If you take enough random draws from that kind of probability distribution, that 1 in a million turns up about every million picks. And if you've got a population of 9 billion, well, there's a lot of millions there within 9 billion. There's 9,000 of them. So anyway, so you end up with a lot of people that come out of those far reaches. So when the biology starts to grow and changes happen and so on, how all this works, how the biological system, develops, there's lots of uncertainty in that. It could develop this way or that way or some way in between. And a lot of time it's just those random things. How is it going to go next? Well, random draw from a probability distribution. So occasionally you get somebody who just is dysfunctional in this physical reality. They don't relate, they don't connect to things. Now, that's one thing. That's one source of that kind of behavior, but it's more than behavior. It's a mindset. You know, their biology is just messed up. Now, there's another bunch of people who aren't damaged physiologically. They're damaged emotionally or mentally. And they get to a point they just give up. They stop trying to interact. They stop trying to work with the system. They stop trying to please the people around them. And instead, they just do nothing. They just exist. They're not biologically damaged, but they've been emotionally damaged to some point that they no longer try. They get to a point that they're, in their own minds, they're defeated, and they don't see any way to change that. So when you're in that situation, to you, it feels hopeless. Now, it's not necessarily hopeless at all. It's just their sense of the way the world is and the sense of their reality. And that usually happens in stages. In the beginning, they just feel a little hopeless. Not real hopeless, but a little hopeless. And that makes them, or they may just be extremely shy, or some other sort of thing that's kind of a mild version. They could still get along in our what do we call it? Our virtual reality that we call, our collective consciousness. With our collective consciousness in this virtual reality, they could get along with our, with our social expectations, but it's difficult. They don't quite fit in. And it could be something, like I say, as simple as being extremely shy. But what happens, they get in situations that conflict with that, like they get with people who are bullyish. So they tend to bully others. And if you're extremely shy and you run into somebody who's extremely arrogant and pushy, that can be traumatic. Those two afflictions are crosswise with each other. It's a problem. So you end up with that person then retreating further into themselves because they're in an environment that's very bullyish, not just a single person, but just people in general. Maybe their family, maybe their parents, maybe their school, maybe the other kids in the school. So their response to that is to retreat further and so on. And if they just happen to be at the wrong place at the wrong time, multiple times in their life, where they're put up against the wrong people in the wrong situation, that can just get worse and worse. And again, this is all just probability of who they end up with at any particular time. There's a lot of just chance of how that works out. Well, for most people, they don't, they don't crash and burn in that scenario. They sometimes will run into somebody who's caring and sensitive and who they can relate to, and then they kind of stop withdrawing and they can blossom and they can, grow up through that and get past it and get beyond it. And other times the probabilities just turn one disaster into the next, and they just withdraw and withdraw more and withdraw more. And pretty soon that's the person just sitting in a chair looking at a blank wall, seeing nothing, doing nothing, hearing nothing, caring about nothing. And they have just quit. Basically, they've given up. So what I'm trying to say is that there's a lot of reasons for somebody being that way. It's not like when somebody is that way, here's their affliction, here's what's wrong with them, here's the biochemical that's missing. It's not that simple. There's dozens of ways you can end up in a spot like that. And a lot of it just has to do with probability, or you might say luck, bad luck or good luck. So that's one thing. So it's not just a condition. And it's not that there's something necessarily even biologically wrong with them. Now, they may just have one of those, 1 in 100,000 draws that produced a physiological flaw, just because there was a chance that that's a possibility. so it turns up sometimes. Or they may have just been a sensitive person that just had a failure to thrive in our culture, because our culture is pretty rough and tumble. It's not a very easy, genteel, kind place. Our culture is very rough, and people who are different get treated very badly. And if you happen to be, say, very shy or very sensitive, that's different, and therefore you'll be treated badly, particularly when you're younger, because kids are very hard on other kids who are different. So that's several ways that you can end up in that space. There may be biological damage. It just may be psychological damage that puts somebody in that spot. But they're there, and they will progress very slowly through this lifetime. They won't have many challenges because they've given up. And when you give up, you don't embrace challenges. Everything's too hard, and it won't work anyway, and why bother? So you're just kind of waiting for the end, which is kind of a waste of a lifetime. It's not very productive. You don't learn much, but that doesn't happen all the time, and it's not likely to happen the next time because, like I say, a lot of that was a bad random draw from the possibilities, or a bad random draw from the social interactions that they had. So the next time will be better. And if you have a lifetime that's not very significant or not very productive, if you have 1 or 2 or 3 or even 10 of those, it's not a big deal. That's part of the probability that comes with coming here. So a lot of things can happen. So you may just end up that way, but it's not a really big loss in the big picture. So there's a lifetime that you didn't grow much, but you didn't really lose much either. You just kind of stayed about where you were, and next time it'll probably be different. So those kinds of things happen, and it shouldn't be thought of necessarily as a disaster for that person in the big picture. It's just one lifetime where they didn't do much. Well, that's better than a lifetime where they de-evolved a whole lot. That's a lot worse. So it's not a bad thing to have happen, other than it just uses up a lifetime. But if you're going to have 10,000 lifetimes, and if you got 1 or 2 or 10 of them that are dysfunctional, it's not a big deal. And most all of us do that. We're not that lucky that we always draw the long straw and have good things fall at our feet. That's some people, and sometimes you'll have lifetimes like that where just everything goes right. You're just always in the right place at the right time, and sometimes not. So it kind of depends on what you're trying to learn, where you are in the process of your learning, and sometimes just the luck of the draw. No, it's not that people are just part-time. People just have different reasons for ending up in a state like that. And sometimes they end up in that state because the drugs are given. Everybody reacts differently to drugs. You give them to one person and their reaction will be different than the next person. All of our biology is slightly different. That's why no two people are look alike. Even twins can tell each other apart. There's little subtle differences there. And if not right away, at least as they age, there's going to be differences. But everybody's different. Our biology has enough possibilities of how things can come out that even with 9 billion of us, you still don't have any two people that are exact copies of each other. So there's plenty of room. It's like one of those combination locks. If you have a 5-digit number or numbers and letters, like your code word, there's like 100 billion ways, you can get there. That's what makes it a really powerful code, because it's really hard to break because there's so many possible connections that code could be. So it's the same sort of thing. So it could just be drugs. Some people, given drugs, just respond to them very badly. It makes them lethargic. It makes them not care, and they fall into the give up category that I was talking about, just because the drugs take the spunk and the drive and the desire out of them. So they just become kind of more like a vegetable because that's the way the drug affects them. So that's three different reasons for somebody to end up like that. And it's not because they left to go someplace else. It's just going to be a lifetime that's not very effective. As I say, it's not a huge problem in the bigger picture of things.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense because then our role can be one of acceptance. Sometimes some people just don't want to do much and they have to do this one of 10 different lifetimes. And if that's the case, then we could just be kind to them, palliative. But if they don't wish to interact much, then that's just something we ought to accept.
Yes. Yeah. We have a problem particularly in the mental health profession, that we see people who are different as people who are wrong, as people who are defective, people who aren't the way they're supposed to be. And that's kind of very arrogant of us, because what we're saying is, if you're like me, you're okay. But if you're different from me, you have a problem. That's defining yourself as the creme de la creme of, of humanity. And anything else that's not like you, there's something wrong with it. Well, we should have a broader understanding and a broader grasp of people, so that if there are those people who just give up and quit, then they should be accepted just as people who are not thriving for whatever reason it is. There could be one of multiple reasons, and that's where they are. And you should treat them with kindness and caring and respect. They are a human being. They are a consciousness of playing a character. And, they deserve the same respect as anybody else. So you shouldn't treat them like they're trash or like they're, move over, George, I got to clean that chair, and you kind of push them over to the next seat. That doesn't treat them with respect. That treats them as an object that's in your way. So it's just the attitudes that we have toward them that makes a really big difference. And if we did just treat people with that kind of respect and caring, some of them would start to get better. The ones that are psychologically damaged or spiritually damaged, they would tend to get better. They'd start finding kindness and acceptance in their world, which would encourage them to interact just a little bit more. And then if they found more of that kindness and acceptance, they'd maybe expand out a little bit more, and it may actually be helpful to them. But when they get put in a hospital environment where they're just objects to be taken care of because they're dysfunctional, then that tends to feed the problem that they have. Now, some of them will never get better because it's a biological thing, and it's just the way they are, and they'll just be that way. But you can't tell those from the ones that could be better. And you deserve to have respect for all of them as individual people. And that, I think, is more likely to heal than anything else that you could do for them. But we look at people who are different than us and we see them as broken, dysfunctional, and we want to make them better, which means make them more like us, because we're the way people are supposed to be. So if they're not like us, then there's something wrong. And we need to just accept those differences and say there will be people who are different. There's a huge range of possibilities the way a human can end up, and for multiple reasons. So let's just treat those people with respect and accept them as just part of this culture. Now, that may be that they aren't functional. They can't dress themselves. They can't feed themselves. They can't, cook for themselves or prepare meals. All right, then they need some help. They need somebody to help take care of them. So we should have places that take care of people like that. But these places shouldn't warehouse them. They should respect them. Take them by the hand and lead them outside to a place where they can sit and watch the squirrels play in a tree. Take them places, even if they don't talk, even if they just sit and look. They may really enjoy an outing. Go someplace. Take them to a park. Let them sit in the park for a while. That sort of thing. Just treat them as humans that are special in their own way. They're just different. And we will want to treat them with respect. And even though they just sit there and you think, well, he's like a vegetable, it doesn't matter. You can leave him sitting on that bench all day and it doesn't make any difference. That's us jumping to conclusions about something we don't know anything about. We don't really know what's in his mind or why he's there or how he got there. And it may well make a big difference to him, and we just don't know that. So, it's worth giving all those things a try. Put him in an enriched environment for a while, and not just once, because anything can happen once and it doesn't move you. But if it happens a lot, then you start to change to function and connect to the difference. So that's a problem we have. We're kind of arrogant in that way, that we think anything that's different than us is wrong. And we have to not see these people as wrong. We just have to see them as different. And then we need to have compassion, give them the help they need, but always give them respect. Not just it's another body in the warehouse that needs to be taken care of. Another person you have to clean up after. Another person that's in the way when you want to do something. And when we have that kind of attitude, then that reinforces those people who are there because of emotional and spiritual, giving up, hitting the bottom and just not caring anymore. They can't function. They've tried to function and failed, and tried to function and failed, and eventually they just don't want to fail anymore, so they quit. And then the more they get treated like objects, the more they act like objects. And if you treat somebody like an object that's in your way, or an object that just sits there and takes up space that you have to feed and you have to clean up after, then they become objects, because that's what they're picking up out of their consciousness environment. They become what you expect them to become. They kind of lock into that and say, yeah, that's me, useless. I just sit here and do nothing, and that's all I'm good for. And they start to get into that place, and then they don't, then their prognosis forever changing gets very low.
I think it would be really interesting if we lived in a society where we had facilities that would allow people to just simply, with these mental health issues, to exist, where they aren't pressured to have to normalize or even necessarily interact, and they could be staffed by people who just like to be quiet and who are very gentle, because it could be that these people who are, say, a bit are genetically predisposed, maybe sensitive or not, but have given up, and are shy, may end up feeling that there's just way too much attention drawn to them whenever they make any progress or deviate from their normal actions, and that might make them just wish to stay in the safety of their just rather rigid behavior. And so then, if it all it takes is someone just to have a 2 or 3 minute interaction a week, we could just let it be as it is. But space should be made for people like this. It reminds me of a few other things, like how I was very surprised to learn when I took abnormal psychology in undergrad, which I thought was going to be about like experimental or weird psychological theories, but instead it's the study of deviant behavior. So by definition, what is abnormal is wrong. And
exactly.
It also makes me think about how the English philosopher John Stuart Mill, founder of utilitarianism, he was a prodigious child, and I think he was excellent at pretty much everything he was taught. And he learned how to, read and write ancient Greek and Latin. And he was so pressured that he ended up having a psychotic break. And the only thing that brought him out of it was actually reading poetry. And so that makes me consider how there's certain people who are, say, even very intelligent, sensitive, but they end up having a spiritual problem, which is at the same time an emotional issue. Yep.
Absolutely. Some people would respond to, like you say, maybe a 3-minute conversation once a week, and that's exactly what they need. And other people may respond to a half an hour worth of conversation 3 times a day. It just depends on them and who they are and how they got there and so on. So you have to work that out between them and the therapist, them and the caregivers, them and the orderlies. They have to work that out to where they can ask them, do you like talking with me? Do you not like talking with me? If they say, no, I don't like talking with you, then you can still talk to them, but less and shorter, until you might ask them again after you've been less and shorter for a month, and you can say, do you like our conversations, and see what they say. Maybe they just want to be left alone in silence for a while. And maybe a month after that, you could ask them again, would you like to go to the park? And depends. Those who have given up entirely figure, doesn't matter. Nothing will help. No use. Park, no park, whatever. Just leave me alone. Well, sometimes you need to say, well, come on, let's go to the park. You might like it. And you take them along anyway, because they're not going to struggle. They'll go along. And after 3 or 4 visits, then you can ask them, do you like going to the park? And you may be surprised. So you have to work with people. It's not like you just look at them and know exactly what to do. You don't. There's multiple ways that multiple kinds of issues can land you in the same relative spot. At least it looks the same from the outside. So you just work with people. Try this, try that, but always be gentle and always be, respectable. You don't force anybody to do anything, but you suggest, and you do it in a caring way. A bunch of us are going to the park. Would you like to accompany us? Or we would like you to come with us. That sort of thing. There's a big difference between, do you want to come and we would like you to come? That comes from 2 totally different directions. So you just try to see what works. But you do it out of respect. There's a person there, and they deserve your respect as a person, even if all they do is sit still and drool. You should still respect them. They are as they are. They're different. And we need to have a very broad acceptance of differences. We need to be very open to diversity in humans. They come in all sizes and shapes and all sorts of mental states, and they all have a place, and they all actually are valuable. And you might think, what's valuable about a person who sits and stares at a wall? Well, they're valuable in the sense that they test us every day about how well we're able to work with them, and can we respect them, and can we treat them as worthy people? Can we do that? And there they are, a daily test, an hourly test for everybody who works there, not just the doctors and nurses, but everybody else who works there, even the guy that just takes out the trash. They have an opportunity. They have a choice. They can just kind of push those people out of the way because they're standing in the wrong spot and just treat them like they're dead objects, or they can treat them with some respect. That's a choice they make. And if they make the right choice, they evolve. They make the wrong choice, they evolve. So they're there as giving the rest of us an opportunity to see the world differently. And that's an important thing, because they come from homes, they come from families, they have brothers, they have sisters and mothers and fathers and aunts and uncles, and they end up in an institution because nobody wants to deal with them. It gives all those aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters a chance to show, a little love and caring. And maybe they're difficult. Maybe they get angry easily or something. They're very hard to deal with. Or maybe they're big and strong enough that they can hurt other people when they get angry. So there may be reasons why they end up there, that's a good place for them to be. But still, they challenge. They challenge the rest of us to deal positively with the diversity that they show us. And that's not a small gift. And if you think of it, if that's a way that we learn, then somebody's got to do it. Somebody's got to play that role. If that's a good way for the people to learn, then it may be people who are incarnating here at the first time. and they just want to kind of get their toe wet. They're not ready to jump in yet. Maybe something like that. Or it could be that that's just their number just came up. They just happen to get that draw, and that's what they do. And that's going to be their lifetime. They're going to be there just to help other people learn to make better choices. They're there. So we look at them, and we have institutions full of such people everywhere. Every state has a dozen institutions full of such people. How do we treat them? What do we think of them as a society? Well, we put them out of sight, get rid of them, put them somewhere where we don't have to deal with them. Basically, we let professionals deal with them. And supposedly those professionals are trying to help them and heal them. But for the most case, those professionals are just ignoring them, just like everybody else, because they find them difficult or impossible to work with. They just don't seem to respond well. Well, respond to what? Respond to a doctor asking them questions? Well, maybe that's not the right approach. Asking them questions. Maybe they feel too intimidated for that. They can't respond to that. It might be something else. So it's a big opportunity for the society to grow up and become more open to diversity. And everybody that's different from us is not broken. They're just different. But that's a big thing we have to get over. And all of these people are learning opportunities for all the rest of us. So you can't say they serve no purpose. They serve that purpose, which is to be a constant thorn in our sides until we realize that we're treating them wrong. We're not treating them with respect just because they're human beings, and we should treat them with care and with kindness, and not just act kind, but actually be kind to these people. Because you can train all your staff to act kind. If you try hard enough, you can get your staff to not bully them and not push them around. That's just staff training. But that's not the point. You want your staff to be kind, not just act kind, because anybody can tell the difference. Anybody on the receiving end of that knows the difference between acting and being. So that's maybe their role. And maybe it's just part of being in our virtual reality. There's a certain amount of statistics that are going to drop people like that out. 1 in 1,000, 1 in 1,000,000, 1 in 10 million, they're just going to happen because that's the way it is. And how do we treat them? How do we deal with them? Well, it's a lesson for all of us. We tend to just push away things that we can't use. We can't use these people. They can't get a job and stay employed. They can't pay taxes. They can't buy a car. They can't be part of the economy. So we have no use for them. So they can't dress themselves and feed themselves and take care of themselves. So at least we've grown up enough that we take care of them. All right. 500 years ago, we didn't. We threw them all in a dungeon someplace, right? And they ceased being a problem when they died. But we weren't very nice to them. We treated mental illness horribly. Well, we have grown up, but we still have a ways to go. So we've learned that we don't treat them harshly. We don't punish them for being different. We don't shut them away in closets and things like that. So we give them a decent place to live and a clean bed, and we feed them and all those things because we've grown up enough to do that. Well, good for us, but we have a long way yet to go. We don't treat them generally with the respect and the caring that they deserve. And we still have to learn that. So maybe when we do learn that, there won't be as many of them falling through that set of possibilities. Maybe the probabilities will shift a little away from that. Who knows?
It makes me wonder how to determine the best treatment for people like this when you are in, I think as many people are, short-term relationships with these people, which may just be, for me, it could be a day or two in this new setting, or for others, it could be weeks, like if it's a nurse, or months if someone works at a long-term facility. And so if there is someone who's minimally responsive, how can you determine whether, and I say this all under the assumption that we could try using psi communication with them. And in doing that, how do we know whether or not we're potentially violating someone's will and privacy by, helping too much in the ways that we think we are, even if someone is doing what they feel like is, less than minimal, in order not to disturb this person. If, say, they want to just be up to their own devices, just as we can see that they are, could you recommend any sort of mental communication and
Yeah,
mental communication that could supplement verbal?
sure, absolutely. The cardinal rule is never force, never push, always respect them as an individual with free will. So if you say, would you like to go out to the park today? And they say no, you don't grab them by the arm, drag them along and say, well, we think it'd be good for you. You're coming anyway. That's generally not helpful. People don't like being pushed around and forced and told what to do. They get resentful of that kind of attitude. That's just natural. People overrun your free will and start to run your life for you. People don't like it. So even people like this don't like it. And so that's a key thing. Never force. But yes, you can use your mind to communicate with people. You can use your mind to connect with them. Now, if you don't have any respect for them, it's hard to do that, because without respect for them, making that mind connection is not going to work out very well. So you have to start off having the respect for them as a human being before you can do a mind-to-mind communication with them. And if you do a mind-to-mind communication with them, you offer them possibilities. You offer them choices. You don't tell them what to do. Oh, it would be good for you to go out in the park. It would be good for you to start some sort of recreation. You ought to learn how to play ping pong. You don't tell them what to do and how to be. That's wrong. That's not giving them the respect they do, but you give them possibilities. Walking in the park could be fun, and you give them a picture of a park and squirrels and little children running around and screaming and candy cotton or popcorn or something. You give them a little mind-to-mind picture of what that would be like. And that's all. So you just offer that. That's what it'll be like if you go with us. And you've given them that picture. And mostly they'll get it. But you have to start from respect, or you won't communicate with them at all. And if you do that, then that's a way of getting through to them that is safe, in a sense, because they will receive that as their own idea, as their own thought. Most of the time, that will come to them as an idea, and they'll say, oh, maybe I would like to go to the park. It's not like, oh, Dr. Jones is telling me about the park. They don't see it literally like that. They just get the feeling, kind of get a sense of being outside and think, oh, that would be nice. And particularly if you do this 2 or 3 times a day for 4 or 5 weeks, it starts to become a part of who they are. Then they're likely maybe even to voice it. Or if you ask them, they'd say yes, whereas before they'd say no. So yes, you work with people on the mind-to-mind level to get through and communicate when they are unwilling or unable to communicate with you physically. And it could be that they're not unable, but they're just unwilling, because every time they communicate with somebody, they get pushed. Mr. Smith, you need to get up and go over here. Mr. Smith, it's time for you to take your pills. Mr. Smith, could you walk over here and stand here by this window, because I need to sweep the floor where you are. Mr. Smith, they're being told what to do. Every time somebody talks to them, it's to tell them what they have to do. And that then makes them put up barriers or just go deeper into their I don't care. There's no point. There's no purpose. I'm a cipher. I'll just do what I'm told and people will leave me alone. So that's, mind-to-mind communication is very good. Even when we think we're being nice to these people, Mr. Smith, would you please move a little bit so we can clean this? We're being very nice, but still we're taking them and telling them what to do and how to do it and where to go. And that can't be helped. You do need that, but you could just clean around them and come back the next day and do that spot. You could do things rather than forcing them to fit your world and your schedule and the way you'd like to do things so that you would be more efficient. Think about them. What's more efficient and what suits them better? That's what I mean about respecting them as individuals rather than they're just chunks of meat in your locker and you take care of them and you move them around. Even if you try to be very polite to them and nice, you're still treating them with very little respect. You're making choices for them. You're telling them what to do. Work around them if they don't want to move. Don't get forceful and say, yeah, you really do have to move. Now, come on, Mr. Smith, don't be difficult. Just go over here and sit down in this chair and calm down. See, that's bullying from that person's viewpoint. And they don't like it. And that makes them withdraw further from a hostile world. So I think respect and care would be great medicine for the kind of people that you're talking about. And then mind-to-mind communications when they don't respond, verbally. And when they do respond verbally, make sure it's not, we'd like you to come to the park, or we want you to, or you need to, but what do you think about going to the park? Is that something you would enjoy? If you would like so, we're going to go in a little while. I'll come by later and see if you want to go. That's giving them choice. That makes them feel like they're somebody, not somebody coming up and say, okay, it's your turn to go to the park. We took the people on the other side of the room yesterday. This is your turn. Come on, let's go. That's treating them like they have no meaning. They have no free will, even though you're being really nice to them. And you're trying to help them by taking them to a park. It seems like you're doing the right thing. But if you don't have that respect for them as an individual, then you can see how from their point of view, they're being bullied, even though you're trying to help them and do something nice for them. So it's the way you approach, the way you communicate, the way you talk. It's just a different frame of reference for us to have, that we don't see people like that as something to be manipulated if they can't get better, to make them a minimum nuisance. So you do move them out of the way. You do put them where they want to go. You do make them go with the crowd because there's nobody there to keep care of them. If all of their caretakers have taken everybody else to the park, then they have to come too. So they are made to accommodate the needs and the efficiencies of the system. And that does not make them feel important. That makes them feel very unimportant. And that will probably confound their disease, make it worse than it will help them out. So it's just a shift in attitude that is needed. It's not that the people in these kinds of institutions, mental institutions, are not nice people and that they beat the patients. It's not that at all. But it's a mindset that we find people who are not like us to be broken. There's something wrong with them. So we have to tell them what to do and how to do it because they can't do it like we do it. Therefore, we have to tell them, okay, Mr. Jones, it's your time to go to the park now. Come along. No, don't be difficult. Come on, we're going this way. You'll like it. We think we're being nice and helpful. And sometimes we might be. Sometimes it's all a person needs is a little encouragement. But most of the time, we're not being helpful because we're not being respectful. We don't see them as an individual person who has their own sense of what's real and what's important and what's necessary. And they don't necessarily have to fit our idea of efficiency. It's inefficient for the cleaners to have to come back and clean that spot. It's more efficient if they clean it while they're in there. Yes, but it shouldn't be about efficiency. It should be about caring for the patients. That's what it's there for, is to care for the people, not to be efficient and cost less and have fewer people. It's about what do you do to help these people? And it doesn't cost you that much more if you have to do things differently that aren't quite so efficient for the running of the system. It's not that big of an expense. People just don't like having to do extra because somebody wasn't cooperative. They don't like that. So they're in charge. The other person has to do what they're told. So what happens is we force people to do what we want them to do when we want them to do it, and we think we're actually being helpful.
And we, I think, often mistake like lack of cooperation. Well, we call it cooperation, but we really want compliance, and
Yes.
that is we want people who are directable and obedient, and
Yes.
that's not fair. And I think it's such a really radical, I mean, I guess I would say radical conception of respect, where we have to see entirely that no matter how we communicate with them, we should be offering them a choice. And that it's also especially helpful to hear that if we're trying to offer ideas, we can do so mentally by imagining you can give the like a full multimodal experience of the park. If they take it, they take it, and it comes to them. And it's in their own mind. They'll definitely be more likely to be receptive of it, instead of a person who says, "We're going to the park today. Are you going to stay home again? And come on, you're going to like it." And then lists all the different ways that they'll like it, which is all just different ways of pushing. You
Right,
know,
different ways of
different words.
manipulating that person to get them to do what you want them to do, what you
Right.
know is best for them. Well, you start by realizing you don't know what's best for them. Let them decide that on their own. Give them that much respect that they have some say about their life and what they do. But if you're using mind to mind, don't do it once and expect it to work right away. It's something you have to do over and over again. You may give them this visual of what it's like to be in the park. You may do that 50 times or 100 times. It may be a month of doing that, but you just keep doing it. I mean, it doesn't take much time. It takes, less than a minute out of your life to do that. It's just not that hard. And you can do it while you're doing other things. It doesn't have to cost you time or energy, either one. It's in your mind. And you can just give them that picture about how nice it is and how much they'll enjoy it, not to trick them, but to give them an opportunity. This is possible. It's not, you should go, you must go. You're not trying to manipulate them into a particular result. You're just sharing what it's like. And you have to share it accurately. You can't just make it seem, oh, it's all fun and lovely. You have to say it's going to have to sit in a car. It's going to be a half an hour drive. It's going to be this way and that way. We can only stay for so many hours. They may be all out of popcorn. You have to give them what it's really going to be like and say, this is, otherwise it's like you're trying to trick them, talk them into something. So they have to see the ups and the downs and so on, that, okay, everybody's just going to get a small sandwich and a bag of potato chips because we have to carry that with us, to feed you at the park. You're not going to get the nice dinner that you get if you stay here. So you have to tell them everything, and then not with the attitude of, okay, so now you need to go. You see it, it's really good. That's manipulation when you're trying to convince them of something. You're not trying to convince them to go to the park. You're just showing them that there is such a thing as a park and what it's going to be like, and give them the opportunity to decide whether they want to do it or not. So that you want to avoid manipulation. If you try to manipulate them, oh, we need to manipulate, James there so that he'll go to the park with us. Well, that's not a good thing. It's not a good approach, because he'll know he's being manipulated. People who manipulate think they're so clever that nobody else will ever know that they're being manipulated. But everybody knows when they're being manipulated. it's not a logical thing. It's an intuitive thing. If somebody's pushing on you to believe something or go somewhere, you can feel that push. Even if they're being very clever and trying to sound very nice, you'll feel that there's a push there and you won't like it. So what do most people do when they feel a push? They push back. They go the opposite way. Not only no, but hell no. I don't want to go to your park. That's how they push back. And now they're seen as grouchy. But it's just a reaction to being pushed. So it's just attitude. That's all that has to change is, it's just that much, just an attitude. It's not like another $1 million will have to be spent on healthcare or anything. All you have to do is just shift the attitude of the people working there. And I think a whole lot more people would get better. And if they didn't get better, they would enjoy what time they have and what they're doing a whole lot more.
I think it's wonderful to hear that, and also to know that, in my new workplace and capacity, we accept, people are allowed to be bizarre. They're allowed to be strange and, maybe a little weird, quirky from our perspective. But if they're not, unable to take care of themselves and they're not trying to bother anybody else, we could just let people be. So it does make me think then of what suggestions you can make for mind-to-mind communication in crisis settings. So unfortunately, if someone comes into the hospital, I don't want to see them panicking and suffering, or let's say being especially aggressive, because it's not going to work out for them. And it may not be that I could say much, but I imagine with what little a person could say, if they supplement it with mind-to-mind communication, it may be more effective. Now, can you speak to whether that repeated with many different people will become a skill that improves?
That's true. You gain more skill, you gain more effectiveness with practice. The more you practice, the more effective you get. And you have to not keep questioning your effectiveness. That will get in the way of developing effectiveness. So you just have to do it the best you can and let it be and see how it works. Wait for evidence to show up that you're doing something, but don't be impatient. It may be months before that evidence shows up. And then you'll get better at it with time. But yes, here's something that's rather common, and that is that people who we call dysfunctional are often dysfunctional because they cannot function or relate to us as our culture demands it. Our culture demands that when you go to dinner in a restaurant, everybody sits down and they're quiet and they talk quietly. Boisterous behavior, making a lot of noise, is unacceptable. So that's just one thing. We have lots of things in our culture that are acceptable and unacceptable. Behavior, the way to be, the things to say. If somebody says, "Hi, Matthew, how are you today?" And they don't really care how you are. It's just a greeting that we humans give to each other. And if you say something like, "You probably don't even care," well, that's not acceptable. That's the wrong reply. You have to say, "Oh, hi, George, I'm fine. How are you?" Even though it's a meaningless gesture in many ways, it's what's required. If you say something sassy or salty or whatever back, bzz, culture finds a fault and you get a black star. So people who are different tend to accumulate a lot of black stars because they just don't understand or are not connected to the cultural norms. And because of that, they tend to be shy of other people. They tend to fear other people. They tend to be very wary, maybe even paranoid about other people, because whenever they kind of are just the way they are, it gets them in trouble. Because when they are the way they are, it's not acceptable behavior. It's not like everybody else. It's different. And being different creates lightning bolts. It doesn't create clapping hands and smiles. It creates frowns and difficulties. So they tend to develop their intuition more than most of us, because they they learn to keep their mouths shut and to try to blend in and not say things and do things that create trouble for them. Now, these are people who still have enough capacity and functionality that they can see things happening to them. They understand that they're not like everybody else, and they understand they don't fit in, and sometimes they try. But because of that, particularly around their family, the people that they know real well, they try to minimize their behavior that causes them trouble. And because of that, they tend to pick up on intuitive things more. It's the same with children that are autistic, because there's a part of their mind that doesn't work well intellectually. They're not intellectuals. They don't do that left brain logical rationality thing very well. So because of that, many of them develop their intuitive side so that they feel things that are going on. And pretty soon they start being able to do amazing things. They can they can take the cube root of 6,842 in 3 seconds or less. They can do a lot of amazing things because they've developed that intuitive side to where they can just pluck that data out of the database. They don't have great calculators in their minds. They're not processing an answer. They just see the answer and they just repeat it. They're just collecting that answer, out of a database someplace. So it's the same thing. So I don't even know all of, and probably even not a majority of, but some of the people who that you end up seeing, and talking to, are in that mode of more intuitive than they are rational. And those are the people who will hear you very clearly when you speak to them. So I'd say that your people who have emotional difficulties have probably a little better than a 50-50 chance to be more intuitive than the average person in the population, which means they do pick up very clearly on you trying to manipulate them, or you trying to tell them what they need to do and how they need to be. So they pick up on that very quickly because they've learned to intuit feelings. And they can pick up those things very, very quick, better than we can pick them up, you see. So those people are very ripe for mind-to-mind connections, very ripe for helping them by making a connection to them, just talking to them, showing them pictures, but respecting them always, not to manipulate them, not to change them, just to say, here are some opportunities, here are some possibilities. And this is what that's like. And, I like you. I think you're a nice person. I'm sorry you have to be here. I know you don't want to be here, and that's too bad, but as long as you're here, let's be friends. That sort of thing. Just being nice. And at first, they won't believe you, and they'll expect that you try to push them around like everybody else does, but eventually you'll be different, and they'll respond differently to you. And then everybody else that works there will say, oh, go get Matthew. He's the one that really knows how to deal with these people. He's really good. They all behave well for him. And it's not because you're really good at doing anything particular. It's that you treat them with more respect. And they trust you more because of that. So, yes, you can talk mind to mind with anyone. All consciousness is netted. You just have to make sure you're not trying to manipulate. To try to manipulate people by communicating mind to mind is a bad idea, and it usually will backfire and make things worse. So just be caring, not trying to tell them what they have to think and what they should be doing. You see, people make that mistake. They say, well, that would be good for them. I could tell them to be cooperative and be happy and do whatever the doctor says and smile at the nurses when they come in. And I could tell them all those things which would make it happier and more pleasant for everybody else. But that's manipulating them for the benefit of everybody else rather than treating them as an individual. So we want to avoid that. This idea, I know what would be best for you. If you do all these things I tell you, your life will be more fun. So I'm helping you out by manipulating you. That doesn't work. It doesn't work at all. They know they're being manipulated. And most anybody who knows they're being manipulated resents it. They don't like it, even if they don't say anything, even if they don't intellectualize it as not liking it. At some level in their being, they don't like it. People don't like being pushed around. It's just a negative. Animals are like that. You got a cat or a dog, reach over and put your hand on that dog's rib cage on his side and try to push him. And you'll see that the first thing that dog does is push back. He doesn't say, oh, master'd like me to move to the left. Okay, I'll move to the left. No, somebody's trying to push him, I'm going to push back. And that's just the way it is. When people push on you, your first inclination is to push back. So we have to understand that. That's why giving the people respect is what the key is. You don't push people around that you respect. You push people around if you think they're lesser than you are and you don't respect them. Then you can manipulate them or do whatever you think's good for them. But if you don't respect them, then you're not going to help build them up emotionally. If they're having emotional and mental issues, then you got to start from wherever they are, not from wherever you are. And the very basic fundamental thing, the very basement level is respect from another human being. That's where everything else starts. And you don't have that, then nothing else is going to work.
So now my question is about the attitude we'd have when we have mind-to-mind communication. Now, this doesn't necessarily apply to a mental health setting, but when we are communicating with someone mind-to-mind, and let's say we're trying to be helpful and we're not alone, we're a part of, say, an organization or some kind of body that is providing the help. Is it helpful to try to depersonalize these messages? By this, I mean, instead of saying, please, I want you to hear me, just allowing, projecting what may be helpful to be heard as a choice to hear, so that the person, and I'm sure everyone's had the experience of, being benevolently manipulated, where you know that in part your compliance is going to be meeting the needs of the other person who needs to feel effective by forcing someone. And I would imagine that if that is subtracted from the message, that it might be for, the lesser point would be a spiritual exercise in diminishing self-centeredness, but it also might send a clear message where the person who is interacting with that representative of an organization then recognizes not that it's just one person who is communicating to them, but that this whole thing is maybe a shade brighter than they might have expected. They may still have that connection with the speaker, but I mean the sender. But what do you think of any of that?
Well, I think that probably for most of the people you would deal with, that's way too complicated, way too abstract. I think they would respond to a one-on-one, a connection with you as an individual, another human being. If you say, well, the staff here are just trying to help you. They really want you to get a lot better. The doctors are doing the best they can, but they don't really understand too much about where you are. So you have to cut them some slack. They're trying. That sort of thing is not going to go over. It's like, that's too intellectual.
Do you think it's like a overly nuanced, like it's kind of a watered down, vague message?
Yeah, it's that, but it's also, it's got too many moving parts. It's when you're in that situation where you're kind of dead-ended and you don't really want to do anything but stare at a wall, then that's way too complex a thought to have. Your thoughts are very simple at that point. You have feelings. That's all. You don't really have friends and neighbors, and you're not a participant in anybody's therapy session. You don't really see it that way. You've just reduced yourself down to a I am, and I have no choices. I'm here and I'm told what to do and when to do it. And that's the way it is. And I must accept that and live with it. And you're just there. So it's more important just to be an individual, just an individual human saying, I see you and I see where you are. And, I accept you just like that. So if you just like to sit there, that's fine with me. I think it's, it's your choice to sit there if you want to. If you'd like to do something else, if you'd like a drink of water or like some other kinds of things, just ask me. I'll be glad to help you. Those kinds of things. You can do that. And after the 10th or 100th time you do that, I suspect there's a fair possibility that person will probably say the first words that they've said, in 6 months, because they've gotten enough from you that you're not a threat. You're not part of the establishment that bullies them. You're not just there because you're being paid. You're actually connected with them and treat them as a person. And it may take you 20 times that you give them that message before they actually accept it, because they've never known anything else other than being controlled and being treated as an object. So it may take a while before you break through that barrier, but you keep doing it. But the thing is, it's not like you have to go out of your way to do that. That becomes a habit for you. And you treat everybody that way. The people who are in the institution and the people who are running the institution. You treat the nurses that way. You treat the doctors that way. You treat everybody like that. Everybody's important. Everybody's significant. Everybody deserves your respect, even the people you don't like. You just accept that's the way they are. They're just surly or they're just grumpy. But that's because they're unhappy. That's because they don't feel good. And you give them some empathy. You give them some positive feelings instead of negative feelings because they're grumpy. So it's not that this is something you really have to go out of your way to do and take your time to project happy thoughts or something. It just becomes the way you are. You treat everybody like that, including the patients and the staff and the people you live with and your significant other and your dog. You treat your dog the same way. You don't treat your dog as a slave. Rover, sit. Rover, stand. Rover, lie down. That's treating your dog like a slave. Now, there may be reasons to train your dog so that you can keep your dog safe so he doesn't run out in traffic or something. So there may be a time when a command is useful, but just to watch them do it, and you have to make it part of a game. Oh, if you do what I say, I'll give you a treat. Or if you do what I say, I'll rub your ears. You have to make it part of a game that the dog can play and enjoy. And if you do that, then it's not that training dogs is a terrible thing, treating them like slaves. Dogs love to play games. And if you make the training a game, they'll be happy to do all those things if they know the game. But if you treat them like, they don't lie down fast enough, so you put your foot on their leash and flatten them to the cement, then all you do is terrorize them into obedience. And people do that. They train their dogs that way, and they're terrorized into obedience. And yes, they're very obedient. They do everything just exactly the way they're supposed to. But that's not treating them with respect. Dogs need the same respect that people do. It's just a way of becoming. As you grow up, you become such that you give everybody respect, including your dog and your cat and your pet mouse and anything else you've got. You just treat them all with respect, and you're happy and they're happy, and they know that you care for them, and you know that they care for you, and everybody's just gets along just fine. And maybe they don't always sit when you tell them to or something like that. Well, that's all right. You can play the game a little more and they'll get more used to it, to where they know that they please you more if you do it, and they want to please you because you're such a nice person. That's different than I want to please you because if you don't, I'll get smacked. or I'll get stern words, or you'll be unhappy with me if I don't do it right. That's training by fear. You can train somebody with fear. Governments do that all the time. Tyrannical governments, dictatorships, they try to train everybody to doing what they want with fear. If you don't do what I want, I'll send my secret police to scoop you up and get rid of you. So they get a lot of compliance because they're fear. But that's the absolute worst way to deal with other people. And it's always self-destructive. Even if you're the big boss and everybody does what you say, if you deal with people that way, you will de-evolve. You will end up being less and less happy, less and less satisfied, more and more jumbled up inside, more and more unhappy. So everybody wins when you're nice and you care about people. You win, they win, everybody wins. So it's not a special thing that you have to remember to do. Oh, there's my patient. I need to say something nice to him, mind to mind. But you should just be happy and cheerful with everybody, just because everybody is a being. They're all there interacting with each other. And it's just so much better if the interaction is a happy, helpful one, rather than an efficient one. Get out of my way. I need to be in the space you're in. That's efficient, perhaps, but it's not really helpful to those people. And those people are in that institution because they need help, not because they need to be warehoused and taken out of their normal culture because they're not normal. So we have to warehouse them so they don't offend other people and they don't annoy other people and they don't make other people's lives more difficult. So we'll go warehouse them for you, and then you won't have to deal with them. We'll deal with them. That's kind of where our culture comes from, that sort of attitude. But that makes everybody worse. It even makes the staff worse. Staff that work in a place like that, they actually de-evolve a little bit too, because they're just in this constant miasma of negativity, of bad attitudes, of tyrannical people who run it, and their subjects who have to do what they're told. That's not a healthy place to be in. So everybody loses when you're like that. But that's kind of our culture's attitude. We take these people who just can't function well among the rest of us who are okay and not broken, and we put them in a place for broken people so that they no longer become an annoyance to the rest of us.
It makes me think too that maybe we could have that same approach to a similar approach that you mentioned for training dogs, by involving play and making it about fun and participation. Because when you play, you don't have a defined outcome, because you're not playing necessarily to win. You're playing just to be creative and mess around and see what happens. And perhaps that should be involved in the treatment of people who have or mentally unusual, or who end up at these facilities. Because
Absolutely.
instead of being, instead of being overly dour and sentimental and coming from that assumption, we could just go in there and these people are fine. Maybe they're quiet, maybe they're just staring off into space. But it's not the same as having, say, like, fibromyalgia and depression at the same time. They're just to themselves. They're just, if they self-described empty, whatever it is that we see, catatonic, if that's what we want to call it, well, we could always go in there and say, hey, what's up, buddy? Or tell a little joke, or if they have a pun, you could, pun or something like that. They seem to be highly responsive to these types of, I've had good results with saying things that people just do not expect, or even coming off and saying things that are just like totally weird, because they seem to like it, because then it's like, oh, we're going off script here. What's going on? What's this?
Yeah.
And then I
something genuine, not
yes,
just somebody reading the script. It's something that's honest, something that's a real person. That's real people don't read scripts. That's the way. Yeah. Well, if you saw, I think it was called Patch Adams. It was a movie that Robin Williams just did. He was Patch Adams, a doctor, and they show when he committed himself to a mental institution, And he had a roommate or the guy next door who saw an army of rats, attacking or something. And instead of treating him like he was insane, he jumped over the table and went behind him and pushed the chair in the way and said, "All right, we've got him now," and they rat-a-tat-tat and they fought the rats and won. And then that guy lightened up and he stopped being so. He changed a lot just because somebody played with him. He knew they were playing, but he was just needed somebody to get in his game that he could share it with. And just the sharing the game with another person was enough to heal at least somewhat, some of what was wrong with him. So yeah, games and humor and he did that with a lot of the inmates while he was in there. He helped a whole lot of them just by being himself and engaging them. So that was a very interesting movie, and it did say a lot. The people who wrote the scripts for that understood a lot about just being respectful of other people and not, "You're stupid. There's no army of rats. Go back to bed. You're bothering me." That's what they expect. And they do that just to try to probe people, to get them moving, to see what happens. And then most always what happens is they get, they get smacked. Not actually physically, but emotionally and mentally. "Get back to bed, George. You're waking everybody up. There aren't any rats." That's what they get. But to have Patch Adams jump over the barrier and help him fight off the rats, that was just so refreshing that it brought this guy out of his funk. So yes, playing games, being positive, just being silly, just like you say, being off script means you're being real, you're being genuine, you're being authentic. And the only reason that you could possibly be authentic with them is that you had some respect for them. You were treating them like another human being, somebody you could stop and tell a joke to, not the inmate that has to be taken care of. So yes, just that, I think, is good medicine and would probably help a whole lot of emotionally ill people get better. And, for that matter, we talk about the average person out there, and everybody's judged by that. We're all judged by this culture that we have, and we don't like people who aren't like us. But once you understand and have a bigger picture, you'll realize that our culture is profoundly mentally ill. Our culture is not the paragon of completeness and solidity and health that they make themselves out to be. Our culture is very neurotic about all sorts of things, and that's the yardstick that everybody else is being measured by. So you take a profoundly, as who was it said that it's a profoundly sick culture. It was
Krishnamurti. It is no measure of
Krishnamurti
health.
said that. So he said that our culture was profoundly sick, and he was right. It is, and that's what we call normal. And we basically punish and get rid of people who aren't as profoundly sick as we are, and who aren't profoundly sick in the same way that we are. They are profoundly sick maybe in some other way. So when you look at it that way, you see that it's a rather terrible yardstick that we use to measure people who are different than us. Because if you got somebody who was just full of love and caring and compassionate with everybody, they'd be so different that people would want to put them in an institution. They wouldn't be at all like us. They would be hopelessly cheerful or hopelessly, Pollyanna or something. They would need some help developing some ego and some fear of the bad things you're supposed to fear. And, we'd need to fix them by dragging them down to our profoundly sick level. So when you look at it from the biggest picture, then it's almost humorous. The people who are profoundly sick pointing out other people who are sick in a different way as being inferior and needing help. Not a pretty sight, but that's where we live, and you need to work with what you've got where you live. There's no virtue in just pointing a finger at other people's problems. You need to live in this reality. You need to deal with the people who are here and with their attitudes and with the culture, and you need to do that positively, not just complaining. You have to be positive with it. So you have to be cheerful and happy and respectful, even in a profoundly sick society. And that may sound difficult to do, but that's really what we need to do. We need to be, what was it Gandhi said, you need to be the change you want to see. So if you'd like things to be better, then you have to be that way, even if you're in a society that doesn't support that.
I think that's great. And I love that you use the phrase emotional illness, because that is distinct from a lot of what people suffer from.
You have more power than you think. Hi, this is Donna from MBT Events. I have had the privilege to work with Tom Campbell for nearly 20 years now, and I can tell you from the feedback received through all those years that he has improved and changed thousands of lives with his My Big Toe theory. As a physicist and explorer of the larger reality, Tom has developed a program where you can learn to access and develop your natural ability as consciousness. His expertly crafted binaural beats are included. Details are in the description below. Thank you.
I and MBT Events hope you like this video. If you do, then you should consider being a Patreon member, because Patreon members get early access to our special content. You will also be able to get your questions answered by me in special Q&A sessions, and most importantly, your contribution as a patron member will enable us to produce the content that you're looking for. So thank you.